I gave the best speech of my career that evening. 62 people in that room, colleagues I'd worked alongside for over 3 decades, and I stood at that podium and talked for 11 minutes about bridges, about load-bearing calculations, about the particular satisfaction of driving across something you helped build. I thanked my partners by name. I thanked the junior engineers who'd taught me more than they realized. I told a story about a miscalculation on a retaining wall in 2003 that nearly ended my career, and instead became the thing I'm most proud of surviving. I was funny in places. I was honest in places. I said everything I'd planned to say. I never once said my wife's name. She was sitting 8 feet away from me. The man she'd been seeing for 11 months was sitting next to her. That was 7 months ago. She called 9 times on my drive home. I watched the phone light up on the passenger seat of my Volvo all the way down I-485, and I didn't touch it once. I want to tell you what kind of man I was for 27 years before that night, and then I want to tell you what happened, and then I want to tell you where I am now, because where I am now is not where I expected to be at 62. It's quieter, and I have discovered, slowly and with some surprise, that quiet is something I can live inside. I am a structural engineer, retired now, though I still consult 2 days a week out of habit, and because honestly I don't know what I'd do with the whole week otherwise. I spent 31 years at the same firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, working on infrastructure projects across the Carolinas and into Virginia. Bridges, overpasses, retaining walls, the unglamorous skeleton work that holds everything else up. I was not the kind of engineer who got his name in the paper. My name is on permits and load tables and inspection reports. That was enough. It was always enough. I married my wife in 1997. We met at a friend's cookout in Concord the summer before, and she laughed at something I said about concrete density, and I thought, this is a woman who will not be bored by me. We were married for 27 years. We raised 2 children. My daughter lives in Ballantyne, 12 minutes from my old house, which is now my ex-wife's house by agreement of the divorce settlement. My son is in Seattle, works in software, calls every Sunday without fail, which is more than I had any right to expect given how absent I was during some of his teenage years. I was the kind of husband who showed up when it counted. I coached my son's Little League team for 4 seasons, even though I have no athletic instinct whatsoever, and had to watch YouTube tutorials on pitching mechanics on Wednesday nights before Thursday practices. I drove my daughter to violin lessons every Saturday morning for 6 years through traffic on Park Road and never once complained out loud, even when I was white-knuckling the steering wheel in my head. When my wife's father had his heart surgery in 2009, I took a week of vacation I couldn't afford to lose and sat in that waiting room at Atrium Health with her and her mother and said the things you say and meant them. I believed I was building something. That's what I knew how to do. Build things, plan them out, lay the foundation right, put in the work during the middle years, and trust that what you've constructed will hold when the weight comes down. I was wrong, or at least I was wrong about one of the things I thought I'd built. The first sign was so small that I filed it away under nothing and moved on. About 18 months before the retirement party, my wife started going to a wine and canvas class on Tuesday evenings at a studio in Noda. She'd always been the one who managed our social calendar, organized the dinners, kept track of everyone's birthdays. This felt like an extension of that. She came home with small paintings, a jar of brushes, stories about the other women in the class. I looked at the paintings. They were cheerful and approximate. I said they were wonderful. I meant it. Then I noticed she'd changed the passcode on her phone. She'd had the same 4-digit code for years, our anniversary month and year, and one evening when she went to bed early and left her phone on the kitchen counter, I picked it up out of habit to see if she'd gotten any texts from my daughter about Sunday dinner, and it didn't open. I stood there for a moment. I put the phone back down. I told myself she'd probably just updated it the way the phone prompts you to do sometimes. I am an engineer. I am trained not to draw conclusions ahead of the data. The data came 3 months later. We had a shared iPad in the kitchen, connected to my wife's Apple account because hers had the larger storage plan. She used it for recipes. I used it mostly to check the weather. One morning in February, I was looking up the forecast for a site visit when a Venmo notification popped up on the screen. Not a payment request. A notification that someone had sent her a payment. The note field was visible in the preview before the notification collapsed. It said, "Dinner last week. So glad we finally made it happen," followed by a small heart. The name of the sender was a man's name I didn't recognize. I set the iPad down on the counter. I poured myself the rest of my coffee. I stood at the kitchen window and watched a cardinal work its way through the feeder my wife had installed the previous spring, and I thought about what I had just seen very carefully. I am 61 years old. I have delivered bad news in professional contexts more times than I can count. I know what it feels like when you already know something is true before you've confirmed it. The body knows first, the mind catches up. I did not say anything to my wife that morning. I went to my site visit. I came home. I ate the dinner she made. I was to every outward appearance the same man I'd been every evening for 27 years. I hired a private investigator the following week. I know how that sounds. I know there are people who would say I should have just asked her. Maybe. But I had a retirement party in 3 months that I had been planning toward for 31 years. I had colleagues and partners and junior engineers who'd bought plane tickets to come in from Raleigh and Greenville and Richmond. I had a speech to write, and I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I decided what to do about it, because I have learned the hard way over a career in structural engineering that the worst mistakes happen when you react before you've fully assessed the load. The investigator was a man about my age, quiet and methodical in the way that I respect in a professional. He confirmed what I'd already suspected within 2.5 weeks. The man from the Venmo notification lived in Raleigh. He drove to Charlotte approximately twice a month, sometimes more. He and my wife had met at a charity gala she'd volunteered at the previous spring. He and my wife had been meeting at a hotel off Billy Graham Parkway, always on Tuesday evenings, sometimes on weekend afternoons when I was at a conference or a site visit. 11 months. I paid the investigator. I thanked him. I drove to a parking lot behind a grocery store on South Tryon and sat there for 40 minutes. I did the math involuntarily, the way engineers do. 11 months. 22 or 23 visits, roughly. 40 or 50 hours of my marriage that I had believed were happening elsewhere. I sat with that for a while. Then I drove home and made myself a sandwich and watched the evening news and went to bed. I did not confront her. Not yet. Not until after the retirement party. People have asked me since why I waited. Why I went on living in that house for 3 months with a woman I knew had been lying to me. The honest answer is that I was not ready for the conversation, and I was not willing to let what she had done reach into the one professional milestone I had left and take that from me too. I had given 31 years to that firm. I had helped design 18 bridges in 3 states. I had mentored 40-something junior engineers, some of whom were going to be in that room on retirement night. She had taken 11 months from me. I was not going to give her March too. So I waited. I was not numb during those 3 months. I was very much awake inside of it. I slept in the same bed and ate at the same table and drove to the same office and came home and said the same things a man says at the end of a normal day. I watched her on Tuesday evenings getting ready to go out. I said nothing. I watched her carry her phone into the bathroom. I said nothing. I am not sure I was strong during that period. I was deliberate. There is a difference. The retirement party was on a Friday evening in March, downtown Charlotte, at a rooftop venue the firm had rented. My wife had been involved in the planning. She always involved herself in that kind of thing. She was good at it, genuinely, and I had never once resented her for it. I arrived early, as I always do. The room was just beginning to fill. I found the partner who was emceeing, ran through the timing one more time, set my note cards on the podium. My daughter arrived with her husband. My son had flown in from Seattle that morning. A colleague from our Raleigh office was there, someone I'd worked with for 15 years, and we shook hands, and I felt, genuinely, the warmth of something ending the right way. Then I saw him. He was standing near the bar on the far side of the room, talking to the firm's managing partner, holding a glass of red wine. The man from the investigator's photographs. He was in a dark sport coat, comfortable in the room, laughing at something the managing partner had said. My wife was 2 feet away from him, her hand on his forearm, for just a moment in the way that you touch someone when you are with them, when you are aware of where they are in any given room. She had brought him to my retirement party. She had introduced him to my colleagues. My managing partner was shaking his hand and smiling. This man, whose visits to Charlotte I could now trace back 11 months, was standing in the room where my career was being celebrated, drinking wine that the firm had paid for, talking to people I had worked with for 3 decades. I stood very still for a moment. Then I went and greeted my son, who was standing with my daughter near the window with the skyline view. My daughter looked at me and then looked across the room and then looked back at me. She's sharp, she always has been. She said quietly, "Dad, who is that man?" I squeezed her hand. I said, "I'll explain everything later, not tonight." She held my hand for a moment longer than she needed to. Then she let go. When my wife came over, the man from Raleigh came with her. She introduced him as an old college friend, passing through Charlotte for the weekend. She'd mentioned him to so many people here and thought it would be nice for him to come by for part of the evening. She said this with the fluency of someone who had rehearsed it. I looked at the man. He extended his hand. I shook it. I looked at my wife. I said, "Thank you for being here." I did not specify who I meant. And then I turned to greet someone approaching from my left, and I did not look back. When it was time for the speeches, I walked to the podium. I had written that speech over 4 weeks. 11 minutes, with breathing room for laughs and pauses. I had memorized the parts that mattered and kept the note cards for the names and dates I might blank on. I stood at that podium and I looked out at 62 people who had in various ways been part of 31 years of work, and I spoke to them. I told the story about the retaining wall. I thanked people by name. I made the joke about load-bearing calculations that only engineers fully appreciate. I talked about what it means to build something that will outlast you, something that has to work when you're not there to watch it. I said that the best thing a structural engineer can do is become unnecessary, because the structure holds on its own. I talked for 11 minutes. I said every word I had planned to say. I did not say my wife's name not once. Afterward, people came to shake my hand. There were toasts. There were photographs. My son made a short toast that made people laugh, and then unexpectedly made me grip the edge of my chair to hold myself together, because he said, simply, "My dad taught me that integrity is just doing the right thing when no one's watching. I've watched him my whole life, and I've never seen him do anything different." He didn't know what he was describing. He was just telling the truth. My wife found me near the dessert table about 40 minutes after the speeches. The man from Raleigh was across the room talking to someone else. She leaned close and said something about it being such a lovely evening. I looked at her for a moment. I said, "It really is." Then a colleague came over and I turned to talk to him, and when I turned back, she had moved away. I left 45 minutes before the party ended. My daughter walked me to the elevator. She asked if I was all right. I said I was better than I'd been in months, which was true and which she accepted without fully understanding. I told her I would call her in a few days and explain everything, and she nodded, and we hugged, and I got in the elevator. My wife called 9 times between the parking garage and my house. I watched the phone light up on the passenger seat. I thought about the 43 years of my adult life, the 31 with the firm, the 27 with her, the way certain numbers accumulate without you noticing. The phone went dark. Then it lit up again. I drove home. I slept in the guest room that night. I made breakfast the next morning. I took a long walk through the neighborhood, past the elementary school my kids had attended, past the park where I'd spent dozens of Saturday mornings at Little League. I thought about a great many things and arrived back at my house feeling clearer than I had in months. The conversation happened on the 5th day. I had stayed in the guest room. She had moved around the house in ways I recognized. The particular footsteps of a woman who wants to be heard approaching and who is not ready to knock. On the 5th morning, I was at the kitchen table with coffee when she came downstairs and sat across from me. She started talking the way she always did in difficult conversations, with speed, as if velocity could cover for direction. She said he was a friend. Then she said he was more than a friend. Then she said she had been lonely. Then she said I had been absent for years, not physically but emotionally, that I had come home from work and been present in body but thinking about load calculations and permit timelines, and she had needed something she wasn't getting, and she was sorry, but she needed me to understand that this hadn't happened in a vacuum. I let her finish. She had been talking for about 6 minutes. Then I said, "I know about Raleigh. I know about the hotel off Billy Graham Parkway. I know it's been going on since last April. I know roughly how often he drives up. I have known since February, and I spent the time between February and last Friday deciding how to handle it and making sure Daniel's retirement celebration was not destroyed in the process. I'm not going to fight you about the facts. The facts are not in dispute." She went very still. I said, "I've been in contact with an attorney for 3 months. The paperwork is already filed. I'm asking you to allow this to proceed without unnecessary conflict, because we have children who love us both and because I would like to preserve whatever is left of what we built together, even if I can no longer preserve the marriage itself." She cried. I expected that. I got up, retrieved the box of tissues from the counter, set it in front of her, and sat back down. I have waded through many silences in my professional life. This one was not the hardest. After a while, she asked why I hadn't said anything at the retirement party, why I had just stood there and given that speech and left. I said, "Because I had worked for 31 years for that evening, and you didn't get to take it from me." She said, "I didn't mean for him to be there the whole night. I thought I could keep it separate." I said, "You brought the man you've been seeing for 11 months to my retirement dinner and seated him at my table. Whatever you meant, that was what happened." She had nothing to say to that. She asked whether she had to leave the house immediately. I said she did not, but that I would be staying with my daughter for a few weeks while we engaged the mediator and worked out the next steps. I said I did not want this to become ugly. I said we had made something real together, even if it had come apart, and I wanted to end it the way I had tried to live it, without drama, without destruction, with some basic regard for the other person's humanity, even when I no longer trusted them. She said, "You're better at this than I deserve." I said, "I'm not doing it for you." The divorce took 8 months. We had attorneys on both sides and a mediator in the middle, and we divided 27 years with more civility than I would have guessed possible in October, when I was still sleeping in the guest room and eating cereal at 6 in the morning so I wouldn't have to sit across from her at the kitchen table. I kept the consulting work. She kept the house with a buyout arrangement. She moved to Raleigh 4 months after the divorce was finalized. Whether she's still with him, I genuinely do not know. I made a decision early on not to track that particular piece of information. It belongs to her life now, not mine. My daughter helped me find a condo in the Ballantyne area, 8 minutes from her house. 2 bedrooms, a small balcony, a kitchen that is more than adequate for someone who is relearning how to cook for one. My son flew in from Seattle and stayed for 2 weeks to help me set it up, and we spent those 2 weeks doing something we hadn't done since he was maybe 19, just talking, without a project in the middle of it, without anything to accomplish. We drove out to see one of the bridges I'd worked on, a crossing over a reservoir near Concord, and I pointed out the particular challenge of the span, and he asked real questions, and I answered them, and it was one of the best afternoons I can remember. My daughter calls 3 times a week. She's expecting her first child in April. I will be a grandfather in April. I say that out loud sometimes when I'm alone in the condo, just to hear how it sounds. It sounds like something ahead of me, not behind me. That distinction matters more than I would have expected. I still consult for the firm on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I walk in, I review what I'm asked to review, I give my opinion, and I walk out. It is the right amount of the thing I was good at without being the whole of my identity, which is an adjustment I'm still learning to make. A former colleague from our Virginia office called a few months back. He'd heard about the divorce, heard something of the circumstances. He asked whether I regretted how I'd handled the retirement party, whether I wished I'd said something, done something, made a record of what she'd done in front of the people who were there. I thought about that for a while before I answered. I said, I spent 31 years building things that had to hold weight without anyone watching them hold it. You don't design a bridge to perform, you design it to function. The night of that party, I did what I was there to do. I gave the speech. I thanked the people who deserved thanking. I left when I was ready to leave. The structure held. He said that was a very engineer way to look at it. I said I'm a very engineer kind of person. There are things I would do differently if I had them to do again. I would have asked more questions earlier, not about Tuesday nights, but about the loneliness she mentioned. Whether it was real or whether it was a revision, a story rewritten after the fact to justify what had already been decided, I still can't say for certain. What I know is that I was a man who gave himself entirely to a project and was not always present for the everyday maintenance of the thing he was supposedly building at home. I don't get to be entirely blameless in that. I also know that lonely people have options that don't involve 11 months of deception. She chose the option she chose, so did I. I chose the quiet. There is a particular kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. I have met it in the field. The engineer who finds the flaw in the design and fixes it without calling a meeting, who corrects the calculation in the margin and moves on. I have met it in the kind of man who absorbs what has happened to him and decides very deliberately how he is going to respond. I am not sure I was always that man during my marriage. I think I became him in those 3 months of waiting and in those 11 minutes at a podium and in the silence of a car driving home alone while a phone lit up 9 times on the passenger seat. She called 9 times I never picked up. I don't regret that either. Some things hold because they were built to hold. Some things hold because you keep choosing, quietly and without ceremony, to let them. The condo is quiet in the mornings. The coffee is better when you make it exactly the way you want it. My daughter is due in April. A bridge I helped design carries about 40,000 vehicles a day over a reservoir outside of Concord, and it will keep doing that long after anyone remembers my name. That's enough. That has always been enough.